Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Wuthering Heights, written by Emily Bronte. Now, before I go into the summary and analysis of this novel, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, at the beginning of this novel, we get introduced to Mr. Lockwood. Mr. Lockwood is this individual that is going to Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is this place that is not welcoming. It's very dark. The weather is very gloomy. It's very gray. And when Mr. Lockwood gets to this mansion, it's just all darkness, and there's no happiness, there's no sunlight, there's no birds chirping in the distance. And when Mr. Lockwood gets near the mansion, he kind of gets attacked by these dogs, and he gets hurt. So the owner of the house, Heathcliff, gives Mr. Lockwood a place to stay for the night so that he can recuperate. So while he's in this mansion, he kind of gets this ominous feeling, this dark feeling of, he's not happy, he's unease, and it's just not going well. And he gets this room. He tries to get some sleep, but he sees ghosts. He sees the ghost of Catherine, who is a very important character, and we're going to learn who she is throughout the novel. And so he's just trying to make it through the night. He's just trying to survive. And he meets this servant by the name of Nellie, and she kind of gives him the story of Heathcliff, of why Wuthering Heights is so dark, of why Wuthering Heights is so unwelcoming, basically. And so Nellie kind of tells us the story, and at the present time, like the novel, it starts in the present. We kind of see this doom and gloom, but Nellie, she goes back to the beginning, and she tells us the story from exactly what caused everything and how everything got started. So basically, what happened is Mr. Earnshaw was this rich man who owned Wuthering Heights, and he adopted um, Heathcliff. And Heathcliff is this dark gypsy. When Mr. Earnshaw adopts him and brings him to Wuthering Heights, nobody likes him. Everybody hates him, and he has this miserable existence that he has to live through. Catherine and Henley are Mr. Earnshaw's children. They don't like Heathcliff. They don't want to be with him. They don't see him as their adopted brother, and so they treat him badly. Eventually, Mr. Earnshaw dies, and Henley, who went away to college, comes back, and he becomes the master of Wuthering Heights. And this is, extremely bad news for Heathcliff, because now Henley treats Heathcliff like the lowest of lowest servants. Catherine, while Henley was in college, actually became great friends with Heathcliff. In fact, they fall in love, and they become the best of friends, and they become inseparable. They like to play in the moors and explore the moors. And while Henley is mistreating and abusing Heathcliff, he kind of finds this light in this dark world that he lives in through Catherine, because Catherine is this one person that loves him, this one person that comforts him. So even though he was being treated badly by Henley, Heathcliff was somewhat happy. What ends up happening, though, to break everything, is that during one outing when they were out playing in the moors, Catherine gets bitten. She gets injured by these dogs, and they were close to Fresh Cross Grange. And the servants there kind of take in Catherine, and they're extremely mad at Heathcliff, and he kind of has to go back to Wuthering Heights, and Catherine stays at Fresh Cross Grange, so that she can heal and so that she can feel better. She actually spends a few months there, and that's where she meets Edgar Linton. And she actually changes when she goes back to Wuthering Heights. She's a totally different person. She's not a kid that wants to hang out with Heathcliff and the Moors anymore. Her relationship, her friendship for Heathcliff kind of changes, and now she's kind of like thinking about her future and her upward mobility in the world. And she kind of recognizes that she can't marry Heathcliff, even though that's who she loves and that's who she wants to be with. So she marries Edgar, who proposes to her, and she goes and lives at Fresh Cross Grange, and she has a wonderful life. She's married, she has money, she has social status, and everything's wonderful for her. Now, the life of Heathcliff gets even worse because now he's lost his true love. He has no one to comfort him. He has no light in the world anymore. Henley continually treats him badly and abuses him, and Edgar is the same way. So the world is just coming down on him at all sides. So there's this anger, this hatred, this want for revenge that starts to build and build and build in Heathcliff's heart. Um, and he starts to think about his revenge. He starts to plan out his revenge. And he ends up leaving Wuthering Heights and goes away for 3 years. We're not told what he does in those 3 years, but he gets incredibly rich in those 3 years. And then eventually he comes back. When he comes back, we hear that Henley got married. He had a child by the name of Hurton. And also, we also get to know that Catherine is pregnant and she's expecting a child too. So sometime 3 years, it's enough time for these characters. They kind of moved on with their lives. They kind of try to live the best life that they can. They still don't like Heathcliff, but that doesn't mean they're not going to live their lives. And when Heathcliff comes back, he starts to put in his plan for revenge into action. Catherine, when she hears that Heathcliff was back, she thought that they were going to be friends again, that they can rekindle their friendship, their relationship, but that's just not going to happen. Um, the first thing that Heathcliff does is that he marries Isabella, which is Edgar's sister, and it's all part of his plan. He doesn't really love Isabella. It's just part of his revenge, and the reason why he marries Isabella is so that when Edgar dies or when something bad happens to Edgar, he can pretty much become the owner of Fresh Cross Grange. So while at Wuthering Heights, he gets married to Isabella, and Isabella at first she thought that she was gonna marry Heathcliff and be happy because at this point Heathcliff comes back rich and he has social status and he's living at Wuthering Heights and everything is wonderful. And she's thinking about a love, a romance, and all these kind of things with Heathcliff, but Heathcliff didn't want any of that with Isabella. Isabella is just a tool, a piece in the this game that he's playing, and he's just trying to win. And so Henley, we know that he had this kid, Hurton. His wife dies, and he's really mad about this, and he curses God, and he starts drinking, and he drinks, he drinks, to the point where he dies. And Heathcliff ends up becoming the owner of Wuthering Heights, and he mistreats Hurton, the same way that Henley mistreated him. He mistreats Hurton the same way to the point where he doesn't educate Hurton. He doesn't help him in any way. He treats him like a farmhand. And so he grows up. Hurton kind of grows up not thinking of himself as a rich individual. He just grows up thinking of himself as a worker. And so Isabella kind of runs away from Heathcliff and she goes off and has a kid. It's Heathcliff's son, and Heathcliff didn't know about this. It's Edgar that finds out and kind of brings Linton, Heathcliff's son, back to Wuthering Heights, even though that Edgar didn't really want to give Heathcliff his own son, but he has to because that's his son. Isabella actually ends up dying after giving birth to her son. And Linton is this boy that's really not strong. He's actually very sickly. He doesn't really make it that far in the novel. He's not like Hurton, that's kind of strong and built. He's just a sickly child. And I mean, that kind of reflects the relationship that Heathcliff and Isabella had because none of it was about love or their interests. It's all part of this game that Heathcliff this game of revenge that Heathcliff is planning out. So Isabella ends up dying, Henley ends up dying, and kind of like one by one, like dominoes, all these people that Heathcliff hates, all of these people that Heathcliff wants to get revenge on are dying or going away. And it's not that he's killing them, it's just that um, life has gone a certain way that ends with them dying. So at this point, um, Linton's is at Wuthering Heights. We have Hurton at Wuthering Heights, and now Heathcliff kind of has dominion over these children, or he's starting to have dominion over the children of his enemies, and pretty much all the only people that are left is Catherine and Edgar, and basically Heathcliff in the novel confesses his love for Catherine again, and he goes to Catherine. He tells her how much he loved her and how much he wanted to be with her. And even Edgar tries to tell Catherine, "You need to choose between Heathcliff or me. You need to choose a husband. If you're thinking about leaving me, you need to make a decision because Edgar didn't want to play a love triangle game." And Catherine's not happy about this. And it's kind of too late because at this point, Heathcliff it just wants revenge. Heathcliff just wants to make Edgar and Catherine suffer. And so Catherine ends up dying after giving birth to Kathy, her daughter, and revenge is just kind of working out for Heathcliff. So Catherine dies, and this is a bad news for Edgar, and it's also bad news for Heathcliff too, because I mean, after you get revenge, there's really not that much left. So even though Catherine dies, Heathcliff is not done though. And the next part of his plan that he puts forward is for his son, his sickly son Lenton, to kind of like get married to Kathy. Because by getting married to Kathy, Heathcliff would own Fresh Cross Grange. And they do kind of fall in love. Kathy falls in love with Linton. He's sickly, and sadly, he ends up dying. But they get married before all this happens. So um, Heathcliff ends up owning Fresh Cross Grange, and Edgar ends up dying too. So they all die, and Heathcliff becomes this rich man, and he owns two mansions, and he wins. He gets his revenge, and everything's dark and everything's sad, and he Hurton is in his dominion. Kathy, same thing. He locks Kathy in Wuthering Heights. Linton dies, and now it's just these three people: Kathy, Hurton, and Heathcliff, just living in Wuthering Heights in just this dark mansion where dogs running around and there's storms and horrible weather. And in a way, I guess his revenge is complete. All that's left is Hurton and Kathy, and it comes to a point where Heathcliff just had enough, and he's gotten so much revenge at this point. I mean, the only person that he could hurt is Kathy's child. Is Catherine's child, is Kathy and Hurton, and um, what really ends up happening is that he starts to not go crazy, but he starts to talk here and there. He starts to talk to Catherine's ghost, and Heathcliff is he's just incredibly sad. He's just his life, even though he's rich, even though he has all this property, he has the mansions, the things that made him an outcast. He has all of it now, but he's gotten rid of all of his competition, all of the people that he hates. And in the novel, we know that from the beginning, Mr. Lockwood was just there to rent out Fresh Cross Grange. He ends up not renting it. He goes back to his home. And later in the novel, he does go back to Wuthering Heights, and things are a little bit better at the end of the novel. And we find out that Heathcliff dies at the end after a long walk on the moors. He dies, and kind of Kathy and Hurton inherit Wuthering Heights and Fresh Cross Grange, and they are going to be married, even though they're cousins. But I guess at that time it was okay for people to marry their cousins. So We see Kathy teaching Hurton how to read at the end of the novel. Nellie is in the mansion and she's working there and she knows all the stories and all that kind of stuff. And you kind of get a little happy ending with Kathy and Hurton just inheriting everything and happily ever after, kind of. And Wuthering Heights just seems to get a little bit better and a little less gloomy, but the ghosts and the dead people and the hatred and everything that went bad there, I mean, their essence still exists somewhere um, in the moors, in Wuthering Heights, in Fresh Cross Grange. So let's just talk about the analysis of this. There's a lot to say about the Heathcliff and what happens within this novel. You first thing first, you gotta look at the weather. The weather in Wuthering Heights kind of tell us a lot about the emotions and the passions and the anger that exists in Heathcliff's heart. You know, this kid. At the beginning, we hear that he's an orphan, so he's a kid that probably lost his parents. So he's already in the world of pain and he gets adopted. So he starts to be happy because now he has a family. And when he gets introduced to Henley and Catherine, he thought that maybe he was gonna have a good life, but everybody hates him and everybody just pushes him away. And the one person, Catherine, who finally gave him some hope, that finally told him that I love you and that we could be together. There could be a future between you and I, and she gets taken away from him by Edgar and the hatred that Henley felt for Heathcliff. All this darkness, all of this hatred from the world, and all this pushback from the world, and everything being taken away from him, made Heathcliff bitter and angry, and he's just out for revenge and hatred. And so the weather in this novel kind of like reflects that pure hatred, the darkness, the melancholy, the ominous nature of what Heathcliff feels. And it's not just Heathcliff, it's what Henley feels, it's what Edgar feels. These people are just angry and mad and they're fighting for power, they're fighting for social status. And the Moors also in the novel kind of represent, because the Moors, nothing grows in the Moors. The Moors are this place in England where nothing grows, you can't grow anything there. And it's kind of interesting when you see Heathcliff and Catherine playing in the Moors when they were kids. That tells you a lot about their relationship and how that it couldn't really grow into being anything. It couldn't become anything, and it never really did become anything because it was never meant for them to be something. And there has a lot to you can put some blame on Heathcliff and you can put some blame on Catherine. The reason why Catherine chose not to marry Heathcliff was because she wanted upward mobility. She wanted to marry someone that had money, and at the time when she decided to get married and to have money, Heathcliff didn't have anything. Heathcliff didn't have any property, and so she made a safe decision to marry Edgar because he had financial stability and he had a home. And so there's Heathcliff being angry at Catherine, Heathcliff being angry at Edgar for having all the property and all the wealth that he had. Heathcliff being angry at Henley and at the world, and it's kind of like he didn't even appreciate his own son. His own son was just a pawn in the game of his hatred. So everyone ends up dying and no one ends up happy, even when Heathcliff gets revenge and makes everybody pay for all the bad things that they did to him. He ends up at the end of the novel kind of not going insane, but he's talking to ghosts. He's wandering the halls of Wuthering Heights, talking to the ghost of Catherine and trying to still connect to her. So it's really dark. It's not a happy ending. I mean, you can say that Kathy and Hurton getting married and being together at the end of the novel is kind of a happy ending, but is it really though? And so that is Wuthering Heights. That's what happens in the novel. Very gloomy, very dark. In terms of my own personal view towards this novel, I think what we can take from this as human beings, as people who read this novel, you gotta say that hatred and emotions and pain, they can make your life a living horror, a living hell, because emotion drives our actions. Emotion drives what we do in this world and how we act towards others, towards other people. And the way that Heathcliff uses his emotions, the way that he uses his anger and his passion, doesn't make him happy, doesn't make those around him happy, and all just ends in a barren wasteland with where nothing really grows, right? Nothing really comes out of it. You can say that the ending with Kathy and Hurton is something that grows out of it, that's something that's beneficial that comes out, but the pain and the horrors and the hatred that they've come from is something that's damning and something that will haunt Wuthering Heights forever, basically. So that's my take on the novel. That's my summary and analysis of it. I hope you guys like that. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.